Hi, everyone. I'm Lily Janiak, theater critic at the San Francisco Chronicle, and it's an honor to be here and to introduce our panelists today. Um, I'll start by reading one name and bio at a time, and then maybe each person can speak a little bit more about their work, just anything from that you'd like to highlight. Keep it to maybe less than 3 minutes, though. And then we'll get into questions after we get through everyone's bios. So to start, we have Jack Plotnick, actor, director, writer, teacher. Jack is an award-winning actor, director, and performance coach with regular and recurring roles on Grace and Frankie, Z Nation, The Mentalist, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Reno 911, and Drawn Together, plus appearances in the films Meet the Fockers, Down with Love, Rever, and Gods and Monsters. Jack co-wrote and directed the feature film Space Station 76 and Broadway musical Disaster, NYT Critics Pick, and executive produced, starred in the feature film and cult hit Girls Will Be Girls. Welcome, Jack. Anything you'd like to highlight from your work?
I think that covered it. Girls Will Be Girls is playing on Netflix right now, and I'm super excited about that.
Congratulations. Welcome. Okay.
It's an honor to be here.
Up next, we have Erica Knox, Research and Public Policy Director for the Writers Guild of America West. She oversees the Guild's strategic research and public policy campaigns, including advocating for increased competition in the entertainment industry. Prior to her current role, Erica worked as a research and policy analyst for 3 years at the Guild. Welcome, Erica. Anything you'd like to add to that?
No, it's great to be here, and I'll just mention that I think most of the folks on will know, but just that the Writers Guild of America West is a labor union that represents thousands of professional writers in film, TV, and streaming. And so our members and those of our sibling union, which is Writers Guild of America East, write nearly all of the scripted entertainment programming on television and all of the original films and series in theaters and on streaming services. So great to be here.
Excellent. Welcome. Up next, we have Jillian Arnold. Jillian is the IATSE Artificial Intelligence Subcommittee Chair for the 2024 IATSE AMPTP negotiations. She is the first female president in Local 695's 90-year history. She is a recording and workflow engineer for live events, adding the Oscars, Emmys, MTV VMAs, Grease Live, TED Talks, NFL football, and more to her list of credits. Jillian started her career working in aerospace for NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, doing video engineering for over a dozen missions. Jillian focuses on technical solutions that create a toolbox for our labor workforce while keeping in mind contractual policy and the bigger scope of the next generation of TV and film production. Welcome, Jillian. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm your resident nerd, your resident technical nerd here today. Just to throw that out there. And I actually represent IATSE, which is the below the line crafts of TV and film. We're completely below the line. We have no above the line jurisdictions within. That's just a clarification from earlier today. But what is it that I actually do? Well, I'm the artist formerly known as the tape operator, that engineer who sets up all the computers that records your award shows and gets them to your home. So thank you for having me. And I look forward to talking with the panel.
Thank you. And finally, we have Victor Rubin, PhD. Victor Rubin is a consultant to the California Labor Laboratory on the opportunities for policy change arising from the activities of the lab. He retired in 2022 as a former vice president for research at PolicyLink, a national nonprofit institute advancing equitable policy change. He was guest editor of the November 2019 special issue of the Community Development Innovation Review on transforming community development through arts and culture. He was also a leader in research and documentation on how arts and culture can advance community development and community health. Welcome, Victor. Anything you'd like to highlight from that bio?
Thank you, Lily. There are nerds and then there are nerds. After 40 some odd years of doing different kinds of social policy research, I got to spend much of the last decade working with arts and culture practitioners and the philanthropists who saw a new role for them and their community development partners. So it has broadened my horizons, and I'm so pleased, and had nothing to do with the fact that the Labor Lab chose this topic. It's tremendous.
Well, maybe there was some subliminal ESP going on somewhere.
Yeah.
Anyways, so welcome everyone. I thought we'd start with a suggestion from the great Ed Yellen as our first question. And so this can apply to you yourself, the workers that you represent, or the workers you're studying, however you feel comfortable answering the question. But why don't we begin with a little bit about the nuts and bolts of your employment, or the folks you study or represent? And that's like, are you all contractors or employees? What's your health insurance like? Do you get workers' comp coverage, Social Security? Do you pay into that as employees or employers? So just kind of the brass tacks. Erica, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to speak very generally as a non-lawyer, but basically in order to have collective bargaining rights under federal law, workers generally have to be recognized as employees, not independent contractors. So when film and TV writers work under our collective bargaining agreement, Writers Guild members are employees, not independent contractors. And so when they work under our collective bargaining agreement, our employers pay pension and health contributions into a multi-employer health plan. And so this plan provides health insurance to WGA members, and the coverage is portable. So it follows the individual writer, regardless if they work for one employer 1 year, and then a different employer the next year.
Gotcha. How about we go to Jillian next?
Actually, thank you, Erica. I don't actually have much to add other than we're also under a collective bargaining agreement as well. And so our pension and healthcare hours are actually based on the number of hours that you work for an employer within a 6-month period. So our members are required to get 400 hours per 6 months or 800 hours a year to qualify for your healthcare and 400 hours for your pension. But we're considered employees as well. And I think one of the questions in the email was, how we get hired. You get hired as an individual, but a lot of times we run in crews. So if a department head gets hired on a job, they may bring on their crew. So for example, if a cinematographer gets hired, then he will tell the employer that he feels this is the crew that he would like to work with, and then management comes in and actually hires. But being below the line means that we actually are not in charge of any type of hiring or firing. We can only suggest the crews that we bring to the table. But otherwise, everything Erica said, that goes for us too.
Jillian, clarification question for
Yeah,
those
please.
who are ignorant like me. What does above the line, below the line mean?
Yeah, so it was discussed earlier in one of the professor's talks, but traditionally, certain guilds or unions are considered above the line: Writers Guild, SAG, and DGA, and this is an actual line item in the budget. And so generally above that line is considered more management, below the line is considered we're different line items. We're not management. So Teamsters would also be included below the line, basic crafts, IATSE. I can't speak for musicians. I'm not exactly sure, but traditionally there was an actual line in the budgeting system. And so that's why we're considered below the line.
Got it. Let's go to Jack next.
Well, Erica covered it very well for actors as well. We have to work a certain number of hours to be covered by the health plan, which is really a shame. And not only that, but there are different tiers. You can be in plan 1 or plan 2 based on the number of hours you've done. And I'm an employee, but I did get incorporated when I first moved to LA as just a way to deal with finances. And I think a lot of actors do that. Yeah.
How has that changed? Follow-up question. How has that changed things for you now that you're incorporated?
Well, see, I'm terrible with money because I'm the kind of artist that just doesn't have a head for it. But so I don't really understand all the benefits but it changes how you fill out the forms and it changes which form they send you. And I have a fun corporation name. But as far as how it helps me, I really am not sure. I'm just glad I did it.
Jack, is it, I mean, we have similar, our members have similar situations sometimes, and my main understanding of it is it's a tax benefit, and I wonder if that's also sort of the situation you're in.
Bingo. I believe so.
That's correct. I'm an incorporation as well. That's correct.
And Jillian, how does it, I don't know, I guess change your tax bill at the end of the year if that's not too personal a question?
Yeah, it just it allows for different types of tax write-offs because you're a corporation. So the employer will pay essentially what they call like a loan out. So they'll pay the corporation for the use of that particular person, and the funds are not taxed at the time of payment, but they are taxed either on quarterly or monthly, whatever you set up with the state and federal services. So.
Got it. And let's finally go to Victor. How about for, I guess, the artists that you've been
Yeah, there's no, thank you. There's no union environment in what I was studying, or for that matter, where I was working in the nonprofit sector. And there's in the larger nonprofit social change and policy research world and the philanthropists who love them and drive them crazy, there's a long history of supporting artists without really paying as much attention to the compensation or job security of those artists, but rather thinking of it as 1 or 2 steps removed if the grant went to a larger organization. And if the grants went to the artist, then it all depends. But what I was privileged to watch and observe at close range was a real sea change and first a real commitment to making sure that any grantee in the nonprofit sector who engaged artists in the way I'll talk about in a little while paid them fairly, and also in many cases for them to contract with artists collectives which had their own way of making sure they were doing what their members needed and weren't answerable to anybody but themselves. So it's an entirely different ecosystem, I guess. And it's, you know, as I said, I think it wasn't one that was based on security or abundance in the past, but that the period that I was watching and the things that I was seeing as innovations were designed to change that.
Victor, why don't we actually kind of piggyback on that and hear a little bit more about these collectives and how they're structured? And, you know, we've got a few union members here. I'm curious, in your opinion, how they might have operated similarly to, but also different from what a traditional union might do.
Well, to take a step back, the
Sure.
core idea that started going through philanthropy and parts of the community development world about a decade ago, maybe a little longer, maybe 2012, 2013, was that arts and culture were incredibly important to a whole range of strategies. It might be immigrant integration into rural communities. It might be transforming urban parks so that they are responsive to the needs of the low-income neighborhoods adjacent to them. It might be building up a youth development capacity on a indigenous pueblo so that it has both the capacity to attract and hold the young people and a way to preserve tradition. Or it might be a way to work in an urban neighborhood that preserves its culture, and in the case of Little Tokyo here in Los Angeles, California, preserve the culture of one of the only very few remaining Japantowns in the community. So if arts and culture is going to be critical, where do the artists come from and who do they work for? Who are they accountable to? And so over time, a system developed for having community development organizations. They might be a healthcare foundation like the one in Jackson, Mississippi, or a Parks Conservancy in Philadelphia, or Little Tokyo Service Center, which is, as the name implies, a human resources and human services agency, or an indigenous tribal housing agency in Anchorage, Alaska. Whatever it turned out to be, they weren't artists themselves. They had to come up with the reason why arts and culture were critical and then find and relate and connect to the artists in question. And they usually hired one or two people as new staff just to do that. And they usually made connections to groups of local artists, sometimes as employees, sometimes as contractors. But the goal was to integrate the artist's philosophy, perspectives, and work into the overall organization and its goals for immigrant integration or its goals for neighborhood preservation and growth, rather than simply making a grant to an artist and say, express yourself about this issue. So the key is the whole organization had to work as a team, expand itself into arts and culture, but not simply turn over the keys to the car.
That sounds amazing. I'm sure a lot of us here would be curious to participate in such an arrangement. Short follow-up question, for how long would the artists be engaged by one of these organizations? Would it be about the length of a regular gig, or would it be a longer term thing?
In most cases, these went on for at least a year, sometimes 3 or 4 years. An artist working sometimes full-time, sometimes part-time with the same organization, building one project upon another. And the organizations, especially when the grants were more substantial, would piece together 6 or 8 or 10 different projects, all of which were geared towards the same larger goal. And if you're familiar with Los Angeles, you know how intense the gentrification pressures were and are in Little Tokyo, and how they needed both a way to preserve local culture and turn that work of preservation and engaging the next generation into a strategy for holding on to this physical space and the buildings and the community around them. And the artists were absolutely essential to doing that. And that took 4 or 5 years. It was still going strong when we finished our work 4 years ago.
I love that you just said the artists were essential to achieving that goal. In the talk I gave right before this panel, I was talking about in the theater world, why it is that artists' work is devalued by employers, by audiences, how that's come to be. And I'd love to hear a little bit from each of you. Now, I don't want to make presumptions, but I assume that's probably been the case at some point in your careers. And I'd just love to hear why you think that might be. What factors make the world devalue your work? And, if that's changing over time, if it's something that's come up recently. Why don't we start with Jillian?
Yeah, right off the bat, I think it's because of the number of people. I'll kind of give an analogy. I'm not going to actually give the organization, but I have a contract within sports. And there are so many people that want to work in sports in the below the line crafts like camera, playback, recording, audio, that the sports employers or the broadcast employers feel that they can pay at a much lower rate because of the number of people that are behind us. And so I always question whether it becomes, or when it comes to a point like that, they start to devalue how good we are at our jobs, because they could just essentially get two people who could add up to the same amount of value. You know, I don't necessarily disagree or agree with that statement, but in their head, I think that they think that's an option. And so there's so many people that want to do this that I think that they feel they can devalue what we do to get us at a lower price because we really want to do it. That's just
For
one
sure.
opinion.
Absolutely. How about you, Jack? Any thoughts on that
There's so
question?
many different ways to attack this. I would say that sadly, Los Angeles lost a lot of production. And so in a way, Los Angeles actors were devalued because they realized they could make more money, lose less money shooting elsewhere. I would just kind of sum it up with corporate greed. I think that we're in late stage capitalism, in my opinion, and I think that shareholders demand more and more profit, and sadly, because there's, oh God, it's a monster that just feeds on itself, and sadly, maybe I think that our government allowed, geez, they just allowed it, and unfortunately, and social programs, you know, we have to balance capitalism with socialism, and we didn't. So sad. We didn't well enough. And so it's really kind of gotten away from us. Anyway, so if you look at Broadway, you know, it's like now every show has to be an IP. There's no new voices allowed to create. It has to be based on a Marvel movie or a Disney project. And this is how money ruins art. And you know, we all miss the 70s when independent film and you could have fresh voices and independent voices, and back then people were okay making a certain amount of money, but they're not anymore. They have to make it's just everybody needs 3 gold yachts instead of just maybe a nice boat. And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you said what was on everybody's minds and in hearts there. Let's go to you, Erica.
Yeah, I don't have much to add beyond what Jillian and Jack said. I'll just say that being in a union and acting collectively is the antidote to protecting the value of the work that they create. So creating that leverage, exerting pressure, protecting their work, that's what union members do.
Union.
Yeah, I saw your shirt a second ago, Jack. Great costume for
Yeah, I
this
did not
performance.
realize it said that. I just bought this shirt.
Oh,
Oh my
okay.
God,
Okay.
I love that. Look, meant to be. Meant to be.
Exactly. Victor, any thoughts on that question about why it is that artists' work get devalued?
The nonprofit sector and a good part of philanthropy has a long tradition of underpaying and undervaluing the work they care about because they believe and until they were proven wrong that people who are mission driven and love their work will work for less than they're worth. And one of the things I really appreciated about the foundation consortium known as Art Place America and the Kresge Foundation, and to some degree even the National Endowment for the Arts, was that they were trying to put an end to that. They were trying to make sure that any cultural workers and artists who were part of any of these community development initiatives and health in the community initiatives. And by the way, I love the references earlier to the Center for Arts and Medicine at the University of Florida, because they've been one of the main documenters of this kind of work around the country, along with a couple other places. But yes, paying artists what they are worth and a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, and contracts that don't exploit them for the size of the project, all are relatively, well, they should never be taken for granted. They can't be taken for granted. But they were making great progress, all of those groups in the last few years.
I'd
Yeah.
love to hear from everyone speaking about either a union or perhaps this collective that Victor's introduced us to. What artists and arts workers have been able to achieve in solidarity, working together, bargaining collectively, that they couldn't achieve alone? And if you have a personal example, great, but also if it's broader, that's great too. Why don't we start with Erica?
Sure, and I can talk about the negotiations and strike in 2023 and give a
Amazing.
little context there. So, if folks don't know, the guild, the Writers Guild, bargains alongside the Writers Guild East with the film and TV studios every 3 years, and this is for a broad collective bargaining agreement that covers, again, all writers on scripted film, TV, and streaming projects. And so going into 2023. The Guild's bargaining agenda was really informed by thousands of writers telling us that the industry's ongoing transition to streaming had made it much harder to make a living, as the companies were engaging in a speed up, requiring more work to be done in less time with fewer writers for less pay. And also, around the same time, ChatGPT was released to the public just a couple of months before negotiations. And so there was a concern from our members that the companies would use AI to take that and existing industry speed up to the next level, potentially replacing the work that's currently done on TV series by groups of writers working together in one room, instead with just one writer and a machine. And so the guild went into negotiations with proposals for new protections that did things like set floors for how many writers and how many weeks companies had to commit to when they decided to make a show, and accelerated pay schedules for screenwriters and things like that. And we also made proposals about emerging issues, particularly AI. And so initially, the studios refused to bargain on much of that agenda, including proposals to preserve the writer's room, including accelerated pay for screenwriters, and anything on AI they just refused to talk about. And they actually later admitted to us that it was a mistake on their part not to engage on AI. But because of all that, our members ended up going out on strike. And by the last day of the strike and the end of negotiations, our members had achieved meaningful gains on every proposal that the studios had initially rejected when the strike began. And so they wouldn't have been able to achieve what they did in that contract had they not been willing to go out on strike.
What a success story. You must have felt so proud.
Yeah, and I'm Writers Guild staff. I work for the members, so it is really this is their decision, and they fought for it and won. So I was proud to be a very small part of that.
Yeah. I'm going to have some follow-up questions about the results of the strike, but I'd love to hear from the others first about what being part of a union or a collective has meant for you or the workers you study. Why don't we go to Jillian?
Yeah, I'll go with what I think is the third chapter of the AI story, writers being first and then SAG. IATSE was the third. Well, directors were also before us, but in terms of solidarity, we represent both creative, administrative, and technical crafts. So we representing everywhere from, camera designers, illustrators, production designers, to accountants, coordinators, and then technical people like myself, actual engineers in the field. So when it came to, and I'm going to speak specifically about AI because that was what I chaired, we created base language that encompassed all of those crafts. We didn't go in with just one particular job set and bargain for them. We created essentially, I think it was like 5-6 pages worth of artificial intelligence language that covers everyone from litigation, being indemnified, to having consulting with their producers, to the overuse and the prompting of AI is considered covered work. Educational opportunities, meeting anywhere from 2 to 4 times a year with different studios. This language covers all of the IATSE members within the Hollywood bargaining unit and the area standards agreement, not just one particular one. If we hadn't come together on that, then there would be no AI language that would encompass, or that it would just be very singular, which could ultimately lead to, negative consequences.
Gosh, what an achievement. So if you're an accountant, you're covered. If you're a camera person, you're covered because you all came together.
That's exactly right.
Jack, let's go to you.
I would just say we don't have anything without the union. And I just think young people aren't quite aware of that. And I wish that they had understood the vitalness of unions and had, you know, with Biden, we had a president marching actually with union members. And I just believe that Democrats are the only people interested in that. So I don't have any other specifics.
All good. Victor, what about the artists in the community-based organizations that you worked with?
You know, I was thinking about three cases, but two of them are indigenous communities where they were able to build and maintain something, a physical center for the community and all of the social good that comes from that in a way that they couldn't have done alone. The community developers couldn't have done it alone. The youth workers couldn't have done it alone, the housers, and the artists couldn't have done it alone. But when they had 4 years to work together, they did. One was in Anchorage, where the Native Tribal Housing Authority for the area basically took responsibility for the revitalization of one of the city's very diverse neighborhoods, Spenard, and used an old church that they had acquired, which they previously thought they were going to tear down for a parking lot, and instead turned it into an incredibly vibrant and diverse arts center for performing arts, for visual arts displays, for crafts making collectives of indigenous people. Everything that that community needed to tie itself together physically manifested in a way that they couldn't have done and wouldn't have done on their own. And the head of the Tribal Housing Authority, a Native woman herself, said it gave her, and she was in her 40s or 50s, a chance to reconnect with the village values that she had grown up with. The other example is the Zuni Pueblo in New Mexico, where the Zuni Youth Enrichment Project was able to build, in every sense of the word, staff and service and design, build, staff, and operate a public park in the main town in the Pueblo over the initial objections of the power structure and a lot of the elders, partly because the artists and craftspeople they engaged both won them over with their ideas and their designs for incorporating traditional images and settings into everything from the 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 walls to the flooring to the outdoor spaces to the performing spaces. And because a lot of those artists were the elders themselves, and they helped win over the power structure of the village in a way that the young, well-educated social worker, youth enrichment workers wouldn't have been able to do themselves. So you don't get that kind of outcome, especially in a neighborhood or a rural community, without that kind of synergy. And that's what we were able to see. And not everybody's, a professional artist in the sense that a native jewelry designer or craftsperson may be a true artist in another sense of the word, but they were given a new opportunity and a new lease on life this way as well.
Oh, gosh, what an incredible story. Are you going to write a book about all this? Have you already?
When you read my bio out, you made reference to a journal called the Community Development Innovation Review. It came out in 2019, and that is entirely composed of stories from this initiative from Art Place America.
There we go.
And Liz Crane, the head of the initiative at Art Place America, was my co-editor for that. That's probably the
Wonderful.
best place to see it. Because sadly, Art Place America stuck to their 10-year work plan and went out of business a couple of years after that. And Maria Rosario Jackson, who you know as the head of the NEA, had been a leading documenter of this while at Arizona State University and at the Kresge Foundation. So they adopted it all for those last few years. But as someone mentioned a minute or two ago, that's over with as well. But I recommend that journal. It's not that hard to find, Community Development Innovation Review.
Wonderful. So this is a question for those of you who were a part of the TV and film strikes. I would love to hear your thoughts on what the biggest wins from that experience were, and then also, okay, so what are the next front lines? What is it you would like to see the unions fight for next in your profession or the one you represent? And why don't we start with Jillian?
So we were supportive of both the WGA and the SAG strike. IATSE did not, our contract negotiations did not result in a strike. So I'm gonna say that what I would like us to focus on now, actually before our next round of negotiations, is actually getting tax incentives back to California so we could get back to work. I think that's probably the most important thing on the table at the moment. But I'm gonna hand it off to Erica to talk about her wins, because I think that question is more directed towards Erica and Jack.
Right.
So yeah.
Great.
Let's
Why
go
don't,
to Erica.
why don't I talk about the AI stuff, and I'll also
Yeah.
mention to Jillian's comment that we this year also joined the Entertainment Union Coalition, which is a coalition of entertainment. I think pretty much at this point all the entertainment unions that are pushing to expand the California TV film and tax credit program. So we are definitely in that fight of trying to keep more production in the state of California. But just to talk through the AI stuff, because it is quite monumental. I think the Hollywood unions were the first unions in a very public way to take on AI in a collective bargaining agreement. And so what we won in our contract, or the members won in their contract, was provisions that prevent the employers from using AI to replace writers or to lower their pay, essentially. So at the most basic level, the new provision states that AI is not a writer, and the material that it creates cannot be treated like what a human writer can create in terms of their pay and their credit. So this means if an employer uses AI in the process of developing a script, that fact can't affect the writer's pay or the writer's credit on that project. So the way our members' compensation works is that they can have different pay scales and credits depending if they're writing something original versus adapting a work, or writing a first draft versus rewriting someone else's script. And so the new productions make sure that a writer who's handed something that's generated by AI is treated as the first writer, as the first human on that project. We also negotiated some important protections on transparency. So the employers have to tell writers if they're giving them something that was generated by AI. The companies also can't require that the writers use AI in their writing. Obviously, some of our members feel very strongly about AI, and it was important that they not be forced to use that technology in the course of their work. So they want a protection for that. The one issue that wasn't quite resolved by negotiations was the use of members' work to train AI models. And so it was one of the last sticking points of negotiation. And the union and the employers did not come to an agreement with them. And so everybody just ended up reserving their position. And so we've been doing some public policy work to make it clear that this is theft of writers' work and other creatives who put, their lives and their livelihoods on the line to create this work. And so that is an ongoing issue that the union is taking on, and particularly in the public policy space, because we really know that the companies that are perpetuating this theft is mainly companies that are not signed on to our collective bargaining agreement. And so that's why we have to go after these public policy solutions too.
May I ask who some of your allies have been so far on the public policy front?
Yeah, I think other creative workers are usually in a very similar position. It depends on sort of whether someone's likeness is being used, and I'm sure Jack could talk a little bit about that. Like our members generally, as writers, don't face those same issues of like their actual personhood being replicated. Though there's like specific instances of like comedians where there's an overlap between the work that they write and their personhood, right? But so we're very much, working along SAG-AFTRA with the work that they're doing, even if the issues look different for us. And then our writers don't hold copyright to the work that they create. And so that, puts them in a different situation than like a person who writes a book and the kind of rights that they might have to go after these companies. So in general, our best allies are other creative workers and their representatives. But sometimes it's just a finding alignment of like how does this particular bill solve both of our problems? Or maybe we need to take slightly different we need slightly different solutions that aren't conflicting, but they just have to address different things.
And then one more follow-up question before we go to Jack, who I
Mhm.
definitely want to hear from, but this is just me being curious. You might not know the answer to this, but do you have a sense of how common it is for studios to use AI? Like, is there a survey of your members that tells you how often they've been confronted with that?
What I also want to say is like one of the things about AI is that there's many different types of AI, and Jillian and Jack, I'm sure, have encountered different types of AI for different reasons, and our members might encounter AI for different reasons. What I'll say about the sort of the script and the storytelling part of the work that our members work on, is that introducing AI into that process creates problems for anybody who wants to copyright that work in the future. And so my hypothesis is that the studios are being very careful about using AI at that stage of the movie or TV creation process, because of how it might undermine their ability to copyright the eventual work.
I
But
did not know that.
yeah, so
Interesting.
right now the Copyright Office does not allow wholly generated AI work to be copyrighted, which is a good thing. They have to
Wow.
disavow that.
So they're an ally too, the Copyright Office.
And yeah, we made, and I can drop it in the chat, but we have made formal comments to the Copyright Office in a proceeding that they had about copyright and AI. And I believe SAG and IATSE did as well too. But we're making similar arguments to these agencies for sure.
And let's go to Jack. From an actor's perspective, what do you see as the wins and the next battle moments from the recent strikes?
It's hard to know the wins because I, like many actors, are sitting around and the phone ain't ringing. There's just almost nothing to audition for. And that's because, in my opinion, the corporations and shareholders, they just kind of, the business was changing so much around the time the strikes came, and they're realizing they just can't make enough money the way that with the old system. Streaming wasn't paying them the amount they needed for their pocketbook, and now things have moved to TikTok and YouTube, and so the greedy people they need to figure out how to make money, and then projects I think will start going again. But they don't know yet, and I do think I'm hearing that YouTube may be a bit of the future, and that means that each person is their own little mini production studio, and that's how friends of mine. But actors who used to be able to be on a TV show and that was their income now have to get a second job as well.
Right.
And that's really heartbreaking. And so it all just comes back to for me, what we have to take on is this insatiable greed running our country, and that's about voting. And too many people didn't vote, sadly, in this last election. And I don't know when jobs will start happening again. I don't think I'm glad I got to be in Hollywood during the 90s and early 2000s, because I don't know if ever that it'll ever be like that for artists again. We were in the old days whores and gypsies that would jump on trains, go to the next neighborhood, and we lived out of trunks. boy, we had it great in the 90s and early 2000s. It was really a beautiful time for artists. If you were able to get into the corporate world, which I was, and now I do love that people, it's like Andy Warhol said, everyone can be famous for 15 minutes. I like that individuals in society can be their own production company, but the money isn't there for artists the way it was. And so it's yeah, tricky to know what our next goal is when I don't think executives know where they're going and they're all scared.
Well said. I think we have about just 9 or 10 minutes left here. And so maybe I'll close with a question and then see if anyone in the audience wants to ask one. But I wonder, as the studios are trying to figure out how to make this profitable for them so that they can start hiring Jack more often, if any of you have thoughts on how we can communicate artists' value to employers and to the public in general more effectively. And in my talk, I was going on a bit about how I see that as the subtext of every article I write for the San Francisco Chronicle. How do I make the case that these artists are professionals working at the highest possible level? So that's kind of my mission. But yeah, how do we change that conversation so that employers and the world see artists' value? And maybe if we knew the answer, we wouldn't be here today. Why don't we start with Jillian?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
I'll speak at it from an AI perspective.
Mhm.
Our main goal was really to preserve the magic of movie making. Like that special process that I know everyone here, like that, like je ne sais quoi, like that like special sauce that we all have. We're as freelancers, like we're hired on a project because what we bring, and that's our magic, like our experiences, our creativity. And so I keep going back to this idea of that's really what we value, is that magical collaboration between the different departments to create a project that is lasting in the zeitgeist. And I'm not sure how you put a value on that other than you just make the choice to value it.
Mhm.
I that's all I have.
Right on. Oh my God, great answer. Victor, how about you?
I was intrigued by what I thought I heard a phrase, first human on the project. Is that what you said, Erica? Yes. I was trying to imagine telling some 80-year-old Japanese master calligrapher who was teaching a younger generation, or some elder Zuni carver, ask them who the first human on the project was, and they'd say it was 500 years ago, And so the challenge is to reach a new generation and a new and wider audience. So because the arts in those cases themselves aren't changing, and they have been around for half a millennium or a millennium. And we have to be very, very careful that we find a way to preserve those fragile things in the midst of all of the transformations in technology that's going on. And one of the ways to do it, ironically, is to make it important and known to a totally different audience. So that if the Little Tokyo, Sustainable Little Tokyo collective of organizations can make the case for 4th Street North and their neighborhood to be maintained and sustained no matter what highfalutin development goes on around the Geffen Museum or the Miyako Hotel or any of the massive developments in that part of downtown LA, they will be doing that partly because they can show that there's a 500 or 1,000-year-old culture that they're maintaining.
Mm.
And if the Zuni maintain their isolation, relative isolation and tribal identity, it's not just because they're geographically isolated, it's because they will be able to say this tradition is being passed down. And you can't put a monetary value on that, but you do have to always be marketing it in the broadest sense of the word and finding new audiences for it.
Mm. Well said. Erica, why don't we go to you? Any thoughts on how we can kind of change the conversation in both when we're negotiating with our employers and just when we're on this public policy campaign that your union is working on? How do we say no, artists are valued?
Well, I'm gonna have to say something much less inspiring because I'm in the research department and I'm not a creative worker. But I will say that we spend time every round of negotiations doing a corporate campaign. And what this involves is talking to the Wall Street investors and the analysts who cover our companies, and we explain to them why our members are valuable to the bottom line of the company. And that is part of how we put pressure on these companies
Oh my gosh,
come to the table with us in
I
a
love
reasonable way.
that. Can
And
we, do you know any of your talking points offhand? I'm just curious. It's
I
okay
mean,
if not.
one of the first things we have to explain to the analysts and the investors is just how valuable what our members do powers the company. And some of that is just collecting what has the company said over the last year about scripted content and how important it is for the work that they do. Some of that is putting names and numbers on these are the projects that are going to stop if they refuse to negotiate with us.
Ooh.
Some of it is just helping them understand about the demands that we're making being like real demands to maintain the integrity of the work that's happening too. But that is one aspect of how we are communicating about the value of what our members do.
That's incredible. Jack, why don't we end with you?
I guess from an artist point of view, you just got to keep shining your light, keep showing how special and magical our voices are. And I believe these things are cyclical. And so executives will realize that people want real humans doing the writing and the acting, and then they will come back to see all the beautiful work being done by content creators, because there is just absolute magic being made by some individuals. And then the executive will realize, oh my gosh, everybody's watching her content. I can make money off her. And then we'll start back up all over again. We'll have another golden age like the 70s of independent film, of artists being seen as incredibly worthwhile and valuable as we are. So artists, keep making content. Don't wait for the job. Don't wait for the corporation to hire you. Keep shining your light. It will come back around.
Oh man. Thank you so much, Jack. Ed, maybe I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, and first of all, I just want to um, thank this incredible panel and Lily for your talk before that. In fact, the entire day has been just phenomenal, and I certainly learned a lot.